Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft, and you know, here on some of these nights, we like to end my time on the desk with a little bit more of lighthearted fare, talking about sports, culture, entertainment, and the like here. So if you don't know it by now, today, June 20th, marks the 50th anniversary of the release of the iconic blockbuster film, Jaws. And we want to just take a moment to recognize and acknowledge how momentous of occasion this was, not only in film history, but also in U.S. history, the cultural impact it had 50 years ago today. The menacing shark from Jaws first emerged there onto movie screens across the world. Want to bring into the conversation right now critic and writer Todd Gilchrist, a member of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, to talk about this anniversary, and Todd joins me. Todd, thanks so much for being with us here. 50 years ago today, Jaws kind of went up onto the big screen, and it's had such a cultural staying power ever since. Why do you think that is? Why was it so big?
It was, you talk about it being a blockbuster. It was the first blockbuster. Before that, the only movie that had grossed even anywhere close to as much money as this one had was The Godfather, and that was, just a couple of years before that. But this movie was really the first film. It was the first film to gross $100 million, and it took, it kind of started what we think of as like the race of how much movies could make. And it was the highest grossing film of all time until Star Wars 2 years later. But at the time, it was just this, project that Steven Spielberg was looking to make after he had made two very small but well-received films. And it has obviously gone on from there to become this, cultural cornerstone, quite frankly.
Yeah, Todd, some of these cultural cornerstones, to your point, it takes a while for them to be recognized as such, sometimes decades. That wasn't the case with Jaws, right? Amongst audiences and critics alike. It was almost immediate, was it not, the reception?
Yeah. It opened in around 400 theaters, and it grossed, I think, a record $7 million on its opening weekend, and grossed, I think it was 21 million in its first 10 days, which both of those numbers were records for it. And, it's a film, just to talk about the filmmaking, it's virtuoso blockbuster filmmaking. It is the template by which, every blockbuster movie would try to be after that. And even now when we watch it, we think of it and it just feels like a perfect movie. Quentin Tarantino himself, was on, I don't know if it was a late night talk show talking about how there are very few perfect films. And he described it as one of the few of them.
For movie buffs, especially who have followed Spielberg's career, he was only 28 when this came out. And you just kind of have to take stock of just that fact here. And also, it was nominated for 4 Oscars, and it won 3: Best Sound, Best Score, Best Editing. The sound, the score, the famous moment. Everyone knows that sound. I'm not going to hum it right now, but people watching, they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. This film, to me, looking at it in retrospect, it feels like the best possible example of a filmmaker who was, taking advantage of all of the shortcomings that he faced, all the struggles that he faced, and making lemonade with those things. And also sort of really leaning into sort of the youthful, I don't know what I don't know, so I'm just going to, muscle forward. He decided he wanted to shoot this film in the Atlantic as opposed to in, North Hollywood water tank. He had a shark, this sort of giant life-size creature that did not work basically half of the time that they were trying to film it. And as a result, he had to find out all these creative ways in order to basically create suspense, to build anticipation. We think about, there's these long sequences where they're firing, sort of these things into the fish, and it makes the shark, all you see are the barrels that are going across the surface of the water. Basically that happened because the shark didn't work. And as a result, it builds so much suspense and so much anticipation that I think, that's one of the reasons that we hold close to it today. You think about how, it was only by accident really that the shark took as long as it did to show up in the film. But now that's what so many filmmakers do. They go, we don't want to bring the thing out at the very beginning of the movie. We want to bring it, at the pivotal moment to make it that much more impactful and that much more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I got to ask you, do you have a favorite scene or a favorite character? They're so indelible.
I mean, truthfully, the little small scenes are the ones that I really like, and kind of I think those are the ones that form the glue for the
Yeah.
story because you have the excitement of being out on the open water. You have the camaraderie and the sort of contentious relationship to these three men, but you also have these kind of beautiful moments where Brody's in his house with his wife, and he goes, you want to get drunk and fool around tonight. He's playing little games because he's stressed out and his son is imitating him, and those kinds of things I think really create such a palpable sense of humanity in between sort of the plot machinery of the film. And it's stuff like that I always sort of go back to. And then you have these kind of beautiful moments that are punctuated not only by that iconic theme music, but also just these kind of incredible melodies that John Williams created with his score. So you're watching like a shark swim underneath the boat, and it's got this beautiful orchestral swell, and it's just so powerful when you watch it on the big screen,
Yeah, I mean,
especially.
would you argue that before Jaws, and Hitchcock aside, with the suspense of Hitchcock, that the horror genre was kind of corny and campy until Jaws?
I mean, I would say that the '70s started sort of the era of the slightly into sort of prestige horror because you had The
Okay,
Exorcist, you had The Omen, you had those
sure.
sort of bigger films. But certainly, I mean, the characterization of this film by critics at the time, I mean, it was very complimentary, but they were basically saying, this is like a fun way to be scared because it's, not just because it's during the day, but, it has such a buoyancy as you watch the film that it's not just, you're not watching, a little girl possessed by the devil. You're really watching, this sort of very, if not relatable, but this sort of very believable scenario unfold, and how beautifully again Spielberg and how deft and light a touch he shows with his camera and all these other things that I think really uplift it and allow it and help it endure today.
Part of the magic of movies, of course, is when you leave the theater, what you take with you. And fear, I think a lot of people took with them when they went to the beach. They didn't want to get in the water. I mean, that was so omnipresent at the time when this was released, was it not?
Yes, very much so. At the time, there was not a lot known sort of widely. This, of course, was many decades away from the ease of a Google search, but but people could not didn't know a whole lot about sharks, especially great whites, and so this movie mythologized them while also depicting them very much as what they are, which is an animal. The movie, for better or for worse, does not vilify this shark. It just sort of portrays it as this animal that is capable of, incredible destruction. And then, of course, over dramatizes it for the purposes of this film. But for years and decades, it not only did it inspire, a lot of people, including myself, to sort of double check whenever they jump into deep water, but it also inspired a lot of people when they watched the movie to want to be or to explore oceanography,
Yeah.
to study sharks and all these other things. So it was incredibly culturally impactful aside from its sort of just commercial and entertainment value.
It's so interesting that you brought that up, and lastly, because it really did kind of usher in the shark as this dangerous marine figure into the collective cultural consciousness. Yes, there were Jaws sequels, but I'm talking about the Sharknado franchise. I'm talking
Yeah.
about Shark Week on Discovery. Sharks all the time.
Yeah, it really, I mean, it cultivated such a widespread mainstream interest in them, I mean, you mentioned Shark Week, but I mean, there were not just the sequels for this film, but there were imitators. There were dozens across the globe. I mean, there were Italian copycats. There were, and for decades there have been other films that have tried to harness the power that this movie creates with these animals. And so you have all these different, sort of different platforms now where people can tell different kinds of stories. And sharks continue to be this utterly fascinating being,
Yeah.
I think it owes a lot to sort of even just the way that Quint sort of defines them as these sort of, these machine-like with a doll's eyes, and just how how cold and emotionless they are. And there are so many creatures that have been created in the subsequent 5 decades that we absolutely owe a huge debt to this movie and its description of that they tried to recreate in some different form.
All right, Todd Gilchrist, we're going to have to leave it at that. Can't thank you enough for coming on this Friday night to talk about Jaws. Always fun to talk movies. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, in the meantime, before we take our final break of the hour, I want to just show you how social media is marking this occasion, especially Major League Baseball. Take a look at this. The Yankees have an exclusive Jaws milkshake and Jaws Yankees souvenir cup to celebrate the movie's 50th anniversary. And you see there, the shake is made with vanilla ice cream, raspberry sauce, whipped cream, blue gummy sharks, and Lifesaver gummies. So kind of cool there. This is, I think, a lot on social media today with so many movie buffs remembering when they saw Jaws the first time. All right, in the meantime here, let's take that final commercial break. We'll see you in 2 minutes.